Good morning, everyone. Good morning to those that are tuning in online. Welcome to our Sunday school. And I believe, is this the last one? No, it's one more afterwards. Got Memorial Day. Not Memorial Day. That's when we'll switch, is Memorial Day. But we are in, it looks like Genesis chapter 45. So we talked about the how Joseph ended up where he was to be able to do what he needed to do to uh, he was in Pharaoh's good graces, but then um, he got thrown in jail. But then there was another instance where uh, people that knew about him knew he could interpret dreams, and so Pharaoh had this dream, and so he went directly to him and he told him about the famine and the the good years that he was going to have, but then the bad years that they were going to have, and what they needed to do to be able to survive. And so, because of that, he was elevated. So Joseph's interpretation of Pharaoh's dreams came to pass. For 7 years, there was an abundance in the land of Egypt. Then 7 years of severe, not just regular, not just drought, but severe famine. Famine reached as far as Canaan, where Jacob and his family lived. Learning there was grain in Egypt, Jacob sent all of his sons except Benjamin, his youngest, to Egypt to buy grain. Genesis, it shows how the brothers arrived in Egypt. And then the scene recalls the dreams Joseph had as a teenage boy that fueled his brother's hatred for him, led to their selling him into slavery. Their reprehensible actions could not thwart God's purposes for Joseph. Though they did not recognize Joseph, he recognized them. He accused them of being spies and put them into prison. He then released them, keeping Simeon as a hostage, and instructed him to bring their youngest brother back to prove they were not spies. He also had their money returned to their sacks. When they discovered the money on their way home, they were deeply troubled. Initially, Jacob would not allow Benjamin to return to Egypt with the brothers. Only after their food had ran out did he allow it. When the brothers again stood before Joseph, Joseph released Simeon and threw a banquet for them in his home. This time he had his silver cup stashed in Benjamin's bag. As the brothers exited the city, Joseph ordered his steward to overtake them and accuse them of stealing his cup. When Joseph declared Benjamin would be his slave, the older brothers were deeply disturbed. They were concerned about the welfare of Benjamin and the devastating effect that the loss of his youngest son would have on Jacob. And then Joseph could not refrain himself from all that stood by, and he cried, cause every man to go out from me. And there stood no man with him, while Joseph made himself known to his brethren. And he wept aloud, and the Egyptians and the house of Pharaoh heard. And Joseph said unto his brother, I am Joseph. Doth my father yet live? And his brethren could not answer him, for they were troubled at his presence. So now we've come up on the scene where Joseph is revealing himself to his brothers. Um, they've traveled a long ways. They were looking for one thing, but then they found what should be known to them, something greater, right? They were looking for food and trying to save their family back home, but they discovered that what they had tried to carry out, what they intended to do a long time ago, has I don't know if you call it popped back up, or they're being confronted with their sin. When Joseph's stewards brought his brothers back to Joseph after discovering Joseph's silver cup in Benjamin's bag, they fell prostrate before him. Judah exclaimed that God had found out their iniquity. He was not referring to the silver cup because they did not steal it. Instead, Judah was referring to what they had done to Joseph many years prior. Judah realized their sin against their brother had caught up with them. And this is reference. There's a reference here in Numbers chapter 32. Next, Judah stated that all of them would be Joseph's slaves. Joseph replied that only Benjamin would become his slave. the others could go home to their father, the brothers would not hear of it. Judah explained that if they returned home without Benjamin, their father would die in his grief. He begged Joseph to allow him to stay in Benjamin's place. As Joseph watched his brothers and listened to Judah's plea, he knew they had passed his test. They were not willing to abandon Benjamin as they had so callously done with him. Now after all this had transpired, Joseph could not refrain himself. He ordered everyone to leave the room except his brothers so that he could retain his dignity and not make himself become a public spectacle with his sobbing. What's more, this was an intimate family matter between Joseph and his brothers. No one else was present when he revealed his true identity to him. This is the third time in the Joseph narrative Moses recorded that Joseph wept. On the first two occasions, Joseph removed himself from his brothers so they would not witness it. Even though his brothers had treated him unkindly and were the cause of his separation from his family for many years, he still had a tender heart toward them and wanted to be reconciled with them. Even though Joseph didn't want his Egyptian attendants to witness his emotional outbursts, he wept so loudly that not only his servants heard him, but so did those who were in the house of Pharaoh. And Joseph's residence evidently was close to Pharaoh's palace. The open windows that provided airflow to their homes in the hot environment allowed the sound of Joseph's crying to travel. And what's significant about that? It would show how much he cared for his brothers that he wept so loudly and not trying to hide himself, even though that's what it might look like initially. But he was trying to keep a little bit of what's that, demeanor, right? Um, the Bible study author uses what do you say, public spectacle. But we always see those individuals that can't hold in their emotions at certain times, right? Where might be weddings, right? It might be overcome with joy that they're bringing other people into their family or whatever. But a lot of the time we see it at funerals, right? Um, but what the Bible study author is trying to show is that he cared. He cared so much that he couldn't control those emotions, and we see that even today. We're still human after all. Even though he wanted to uh, be get equal with them, right? He was trying to make them go through certain things right here, but his heart for God overcame all that, and it came out in this emotion. Now that Joseph was alone with his brothers, he spoke to them in their own language for the first time. Getting directly to the point, Joseph blurted out, "I am Joseph." He quickly followed his announcement by asking, "Doth my father yet live?" This is the second time Joseph had asked him about his father, revealing his deep love and concern for Jacob. Previously, he called Jacob your father, but now he could say my father. Joseph also recognized that his loss to his father and the threat of losing Benjamin was difficult for Jacob. The brothers were frozen in consternation as they heard Joseph's revelation. They had just heard the second most powerful man in Egypt declare that their youngest brother was to become his slave. It must have seemed as if matters could not have gotten any worse. Now, years later, they stood face to face with the brother whom they had stripped and thrown into a cistern, sold into slavery, and was now a ruler of Egypt. Upon hearing Joseph's words, they were troubled and too stunned to reply. Their response was understandable. If Joseph chose to treat them as they had treated him, then what hope did they have? Right? Again, that moment right there where they're confronted with not what they're trying to do, because we would probably think that they're trying to do a good thing, trying to get food, give grain, trying to protect their brother, trying to protect their family at home. But in trying to do and serve their people, they're confronted with a old situation that they had yet to deal with, and this is their response. They didn't know how to deal with it. Okay. The Bible study author says, why do people long for reconciliation? I know there's a follow-up question, is what frightens them about it, but that could be put into one question, is when people want to, why might people not seek reconciliation? Because of this situation right here. They don't know how to deal with it. They might want people to be okay with them, right? We might want people to play nice with us and all that. But how do we actually get to that point? How do we work through those problems? And it's hard. Why might people be afraid of, well, for those that might know what church is about, why might they be afraid to actually come and study the Bible? Because it might reveal something about themselves. See, what we're seeing here is that point in time where Joseph's brothers have to deal with that sin that they committed a long time ago. And when you come to church, when you start studying, when you start reading your Bible and you start studying the Word of God, you have to come to that point. You can't do anything to save yourself. That's why God sent his son to die for you. And you have to deal with that. And what people get scared about is they can't overcome that. But they don't have to worry about that. If they know the story about Jesus Christ, if they've been introduced to that relationship, if God has called out to them to save them, right? He's already done that. And so there's not a whole lot to be afraid of, except that if you still put yourself in that spot, if you're still trying to make sure that you can overcome it, it's not going to work out. See, God has to overcome it. And that's why these brothers here, they're frozen. They don't know how to act, how to do anything, because they've been caught. Joseph found out about what's going on. He said, oh no, this whole time they've been thinking that he's got sold into slavery. For all they know, he's dead to them. But now they have to come to that realization. Well, he's still alive. Not only that, they told his dad. They told their dad that he was gone, and he's worried about him, and that's why they're worried about Benjamin, because losing two sons then, right, would be over the top. That's what their excuse is. Anyways. And Joseph said unto his brethren, Come near to me, I pray you. And they came near, and he said, I am Joseph your brother, whom you sold into Egypt. Now therefore be not grieved, nor angry with yourselves, that ye sold me hither. For God did send me before you to preserve life. For these 2 years hath the famine been in the land, and yet there have been 5 years in which there shall neither be earing nor harvest. And God sent me before you to preserve you a posterity in the earth, and to save your lives by a great deliverance. So now it was not you that sent me hither, but God. And he hath made me a father to Pharaoh, and lord of all his house, and a ruler throughout all the land of Egypt. He's seen that it's amazing, right? It's unexplainable. And when we back up to that verse, right? When we're thinking about coming to that point, we don't have any idea of how we're going to handle that. But when we're even told that, right, the brothers are there, they're frozen in their own guilt. Okay, they can't move. But hearing this, what kind of relief they might have that Joseph he even said that. So now therefore be not grieved nor angry with yourselves that you sold that that you guys did this to me. This is what you did, but don't worry about it. Recognizing their consternation and fear, Joseph called them to come closer. As they came near, he said to them, I am Joseph, your brother, identifying not only his name, but his kinship to them. He did not see them as enemies on whom to seek revenge, but as brothers. It is also noteworthy that Joseph also identified himself as the one they sold into Egypt. True forgiveness is not acting as if no wrong has been committed. Instead, forgiveness recognizes the wrong and chooses to show mercy, kindness, and grace in spite of it. This is what the Lord has done for every believer. Though God recognizes we have sinned against him, and that is it is impossible for us to atone for our offenses against him, he gave his son as payment for our sin. He made a way for us to be reconciled to him by grace through faith. Joseph communicated his current concern for his brothers as he counseled them not to be grieved nor angry with themselves for having sold him to slavery in Egypt. Again, Joseph did not act as if they had done no wrong. They certainly were guilty of egregious sins against him. God was able to bring out the good of their sins, but with every sin, there are consequences and the loss of blessings that could have been. Joseph recognized that God was at work in his life, and even when his brothers had treated him wrongly. Recognizing the sovereignty of God in one's life means understanding that he rules and works according to his eternal purpose. Even through events that seem to contradict or oppose his rule, God has sent Joseph to Egypt ahead of his family to preserve their lives and the lives of many others. And see, that's what he was trying to show him. He wasn't boasting, even though he didn't understand, and we kind of understood. We kind of studied that last week when Junior was talking about his gift. You should be using your gift, obviously for God, but for other people as well. And when he was young, he didn't know what he had. He didn't know what he was capable of, right? And because he was sharing his gift a little prematurely, it all worked out in the end. His brothers didn't recognize that he had a true gift. He thought that he was just boasting and maybe even a little bit more than bragging, like showing them, like what's that? There's a word for that. When in the animal world, it would be just, considered asserting your dominance. But when there's a less skilled player in a competition, and the more skilled player recognizes it and they want to take advantage of it, or they just want to show what they're capable of, right? That's what the brothers thought. Maybe we're assuming here that's what Joseph was doing, right? And they didn't like it. They didn't like it one bit. Didn't mind the fact that he was already the favored son, but he was going about boasting that he had these abilities, right? That's not going to go over well with anybody. But that's what Joseph was trying to show them. He's like, that activity, what you guys did in selling me, maybe even planning to murder me, dropping me down there and letting me just waste away. All of that was so that God could put me in these spots, could put me in these situations to where I had an opportunity to be able to save you, for you guys to come. And God already knew that this famine was going to take place, that everything was going to happen. And he revealed later on that, we're gonna have 7 years of abundance, and we're going to be able to stockpile. Nobody else is going to be able to do that. And the lands around them, they didn't have that same foresight. They didn't have that same ability, that same gift to be able to see what was ahead, right? And so they stockpiled, and these people that would journey, right? He knew that his family was going to be a part of that, and it all worked out for Joseph to be able to take care of their brothers. Joseph gave his brothers information about the famine they could not have otherwise known. Obviously, they knew there was a famine. What they did not know is that the famine was going to last 5 years. If God had not sent Joseph ahead of them to open the way for them to come to Egypt, they would not have survived. God was faithful to the covenant promises he made to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob by saving their offspring. This is the central point of the entire Joseph narrative. For the third time in the verses 5 through 8, Joseph emphatically stated that it was God who ultimately sent him to Egypt, not his brothers. God's purposes transcended the jealousy and wrongdoing of Joseph's brothers. Joseph looked at everything that had happened to him up to this point and realized that God's hand was upon him, and that God had superintended his rise to become ruler throughout all the land of Egypt. It recalls Proverbs 16:9, which declares, "A man's heart deviseth his way, but the Lord directeth his steps." I wish I had a Christian Standard version of that. But we see that, right? We as humans can see where we want to be, where we want to go, all those things that we want to accomplish, right? That's what he's talking about with the heart. But it's not us that gets there. It's God that gets us there, because he has to line everything else up for us to be able to get on that right path and be able to achieve those things. And it's not achieving them like we might think. A lot of people will boast about their accomplishments that they did. Well, in retrospect, if they really thought about it, they were given an opportunity, right, to be in a certain time, in a certain situation, to be able to take advantage of that. And really, they should be thanking God. Not to say that everything happens because God wants some kind of glory out of it, but he should get the glory because he's directing everything else to be able to line up for that. It's not that we get that ability because we're doing it ourselves. He makes time, allow us to be able to practice even. In sports is always a good analogy for practice. Practice doesn't happen. You can practice once and then take it to the ball game. You have to constantly get conditioned for the response that you want when you are in that competition. The same way it goes in life, though. We can't just show up to church one time and be able to say that we're going to be all right. Joseph says that, right? He tried to use his gift. He said that everything's going to be this way. He didn't see when he was going to be sold into slavery. He didn't see when Potiphar's wife was going to try to accuse him of wrongdoing. He didn't know that he was going to be called upon by the ruler of Egypt to interpret a dream. But he kept serving God. He kept having that faith. When we was talking about mothers and the faith that they have, I really liked Chris's words about the scripture that he read, and I couldn't help but think about when Jesus arrived on the scene. Everybody was coming to see him, but she was given a vision. She was given a little bit of insight into what he represented. Okay, everybody was celebrating everything, but it mentions in Luke, it says but she kept all this treasured up in her heart because she knew that she had to have faith in God to be able to, for everything else to be carried out. She knew that Jesus was special, but that God had a divine plan, and she was trusting him. She continually had to trust him for it to be rolled out and played out like it was supposed to be for Jesus to accomplish his mission. And that's what Joseph had to constantly do. It wasn't all of a sudden at once that Joseph was able to get all that. He had to practice this. He had to do that. And that's what, if anything, we have to recognize when these brothers are confronted with that, they probably weren't serving God. And we could say that with 100% because we see it. But when we come upon other, it might not even be non-believers, but when we come up on believers that have trouble with reconciliation or with just serving the Lord, right? We have to be cautious. We have to be wary, we have to be aware of the situation because it might be hard because they haven't been practicing. And we have to show them that grace, just like what Joseph was doing here. We have to show them the way. We might have to be the example to be able to bring them closer to back into God's family. How does recognizing God's work in and through us help us cope with life's challenges? Again, we just went over that. We see where he's working, and it might not be the same response for everybody. That's why we have to be gracious when we're bringing people along with this. So we're going to see now where Joseph's brothers are taken care of, but not just Joseph's brothers, but his entire family, right? It says, haste ye and go up to my father and say unto him, thus saith thy son Joseph, God hath made me Lord of all of Egypt. Come down unto me, tarry not, and thou shalt dwell in the land of Goshen. And thou shalt be near unto me, thou and thy children and thy children's children and thy flocks and thy herds and all that thou hast. And there will I nourish thee, for yet there are 5 years of famine, lest thou and thy household and all that thou hast come to poverty. And behold, your eyes see, and the eyes of my brother Benjamin, that it is my mouth that speaketh unto you. And ye shall tell my father of all my glory in Egypt, and all that ye have seen, and ye shall have haste and bring down my father hither. And he fell upon his brother Benjamin's neck and wept, and Benjamin wept upon his neck. Moreover, he kissed all his brethren and wept upon them, and after that his brethren talked with them. So after revealing to him who he was, he then gave him instructions about how they were going to function from this point on. And it's important because it shows not only his authority and his responsibility, right? He has authority in all the land of Egypt, but he also has a commitment to his family, and that he wants to keep up that commitment. He wants to show them love, right? So he says, hey, we're going to give you a spot here, and so that you can be close and that you don't perish in this famine, because there's still yet more famine to come. They had only experienced a little bit of it, but now, because Egypt had stored up a lot of extra, which isn't extra, it was enough to take care of them through these 7 bad years. They were going to be able to live, not only his family, but everything that they wanted to take care of. And he said, go and bring all of that here, and we're going to set you a spot here. It'll be close, and we're going to take care of you. And Joseph instructed his brethren, haste ye and go up to my father and tell him, God hath made me Lord of all of Egypt. Therefore Jacob needed to tarry not. By acknowledging that God made him Lord of all Egypt, Joseph declared that God alone could do what seemed impossible and bring about such a tremendous salvation. Apparently Joseph already had given thought to this as he revealed his plan for his family to come to Egypt. He told his brothers they could return with all that they had belonged to them and dwell in the land of Goshen. The land of Goshen was located in the northeast region of Egypt in the eastern delta of the Nile. It was well suited for shepherding, and an occupation Egyptians typically shunned. This must have been a significant tract of land to accommodate all of Jacob and his sons' families and herds. However, there would be 5 more years of famine. Therefore, until the land was able to produce what they needed, Joseph would sustain them. Joseph instructed his brothers to bear witness to Jacob everything that they had seen and experienced in Egypt regarding Joseph, especially Joseph's glory in Egypt. Joseph most likely mentioned Benjamin by name because of their shared bloodline, and also because he believed Benjamin would serve as a more dependable witness. The other brothers continued difficulty processing everything that was happening is evidenced by Joseph saying, "It is my mouth that speaketh unto you," meaning it's really me. Furthermore, Benjamin would be a better witness because the brothers would have to confess that they had sold Joseph into Egypt. And Joseph's reunion with his brothers reveals a marked difference between Joseph and Benjamin on the one hand, and Joseph with the rest of his brothers on the other. Hugging, kissing, and weeping were common expressions of reunion. And Joseph hugged Benjamin, and the two of them wept. However, only Joseph and Benjamin wept on this occasion. The rest of the brothers are reported as talking with Joseph. This fact may reflect that the other brothers were unconvinced Joseph's expressed desire for reconciliation with them was sincere. Later, when their father died, they revealed their fear that Joseph might retaliate. This is later on in Genesis. Nevertheless, Joseph's forgiveness was genuine. And we kind of see that with what he's talking about here. Let's kind of wrap up on this point. So we see the point where he's given an opportunity to reveal himself to his brothers, to confront them, but it wasn't so much to confront them with guilt. It was to confront them that, hey, I'm still alive and I still care about you. Now, on the other hand, most of the brothers were like, this is a bad situation. When they're confronted with that, you can kind of see they're frozen stiff because it's like they seen a ghost, and it wasn't a ghost. It was the real Joseph. But when they were confronted with that, they didn't know what to believe. They didn't know how to go about things. And this is an important point in that reconciliation process. Who are we going to go to? Because when we're confronted with sin, we can flee. We can run away from it. We might not get very far from it, but that is an option. We don't have to deal with it, or we can deal with it. See, Joseph, he could have taken care of his brothers and said, you know what? This is what they did to me. We can do the same back. They can retaliate. That's what the brothers are kind of thinking about. And that's what the Bible study author wants to say about their actions later on. But they didn't know how to deal with it. And because they didn't know how to deal with it, they're not ready to actually take the steps to be able to reconcile. And that's a big point. You see, if we come to that part in our faith with Jesus Christ, most of us have already worked through that point, right? We already recognize that God has sent his son to die for us, that we accept him as Lord and Savior of our life, and we try to live a better life. Sometimes we fail, but we're given grace. As long as we acknowledge that Jesus paid for those sins and we keep coming back to him, we're going to be okay. It's when we get in doubt. And that's what the brothers are revealing here. There's a constant struggle. There's a constant struggle with that point in time when we're confronted with guilt, right? And that's why when we come to that saving knowledge of Jesus Christ, we want to stay away from those sins. We want to act better. We want to do better. But only after we've dealt with those things in the past. See? Because they're not going to deal with them, the brothers are going to go down another path. They're going to think that Joseph is going to, get after them before what they did. And their thought is the only reason that he's taking care of us is because he wants to take care of his father. Well, when Jacob passes, we see that it's really true that he really loves his brothers and wants to take care of them. However, see, they're not recognizing the real reason that everything is taking place in the first place. Even though he told them straight up, they're not believing, right? And that goes true for everybody that we encounter today when we're trying to promote God, when we're trying to minister to people, right? We have to get out of the way. We can't just keep hammering them with, well, you got to do this, you got to do that, you got to do that. We got to let God work. We got to get out of the way and let God work. We need to be there to support them, just like Joseph was. He was making a life for them, making a better life for them, because out there in the famine, they would have wasted away. They wouldn't have survived. But in the meantime, he brought them, took care of them, fed them, clothed them, right? Gave them occupations that, the Egyptians really didn't like it, but they were good at it. They thrived on that. They took care of them. But it was God that was ultimately going to have to win out and be able to take care, to be able to reconcile their hearts. And that's where we have to remember that it's God that saves, not us. Even though as much as we want to try to help and do everything we can for people, it's God that works on that soul to be able to bring them out of that sin and to be able to bring them out of that old life, right? So why is it important to include actions that demonstrate forgiveness when reconciling with others? So that we can support their journey, that relationship with God. And a good example is that, taking care of them and doing all that, but watching out for them too. And that's what we have to do for us, for all of our brothers and sisters out there in Christ. We have to watch out for them. We have to make sure that, if we see something, I always like that phrase. It was real popular after 9/11, even more so when terrorism was on the rise. I said, if you see something, say something, right? Go to the law enforcement authorities, do what you need to do. But that's the same for our people, for our brothers and our sisters. If we see something, say something. Now, you don't have to confront them and say, hey, you're wrong in this. Ask if they're all right. Ask if they're doing okay. Ask about their day, right? Ask about, just care about them. Instead of trying to instruct them, love on them. And that's what Joseph is showing here. That was his way of showing love, was being able to take care of them and not retaliating. Like, again, he had the authority to do what he needed to do if he wanted to get even. Instead, he showed love. And that's the same way that God shows us love. He could do what he needs to do to get sin out of this world, but instead he chooses love. He gives us an option to be able to come to him, to be able to experience grace instead of battling with him. And so, any questions? I like this Bible study. We're gonna get into next week. It's the final one right before Memorial Day. Memorial Day is next week, y'all. It's crazy how fast we're already going through this year. Any questions, comments? All right, so we're gonna go ahead and be dismissed from Sunday school. And Ken, would you dismiss us?